All right, we got Paul Dardeau on the Bulletproof Handyman channel with our very first interview. How are you doing, Paul?
Doing great. How about yourself?
I'm doing really, really well. So a little background for the audience. How long have you been like interacting with this channel? It feels like a really long time.
I think somewhere around, so I started my handyman business in July, but I was contemplating it before, for some period of time before then. So I'm guessing it must have been around maybe May, June time frame,
Okay,
something
so
like
about a
that.
year, almost a year, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Cool, cool. All right. So I'm gonna start. I think I'm gonna start. And by the way, for the audience that's watching, this is my first time interviewing anybody, so be patient with me, please, as well. But I think I'm gonna try to start all of the interviews off with this if it works out well. I've just got one really, truly preset question. I want you to imagine you and I are friends, but I want you to imagine that I'm a really close friend of yours that you really care about. You know me to be a hard worker. You know me to have like good, solid ethics and whatnot. Like I fit a baseline of a responsible person that you care about, and that's a close friend. And I come to you and say, "Hey, man, I'm thinking of quitting my job and starting a handyman business." And you happen to know that I know how to use a few tools. I fix some stuff. I can problem solve. I'm not necessarily a handyman, but I'm a problem solver. What do you think I should do if I come to you and I fit those qualifications? Do you think that number one, can I successfully, without being having a history in construction and whatnot, can I successfully start a handyman business? Should I start a handyman business? And what advice would you give me if I was going to? With no experience other than just being a guy who's kind of handy, who has a few tools, good problem solver.
That's a really good question. I think I think I would start with a question of my own, which is uh, I would probably say, tell me more about why handyman business idea is appealing to you. And I would also say or ask, what other possibilities have you considered? And basically like what of the handyman business idea is most appealing, and what are the parts of a handyman business that are most concerning or challenges, for a couple reasons. One is just to see if my friend, how deeply have they been thinking about it, and then um, to kind of, if they haven't been thinking about it real deeply, or maybe they have but maybe haven't delved into all the different aspects of it, to maybe prod them along to help them enter into it with the eyes wide open, so that they're
Yeah,
basically to minimize the amount of surprises more than
yeah.
anything. And so I think the other thing is, one of the things that you've mentioned in some of your videos is that, what is it, when you say what is a handyman, and you say I'll give my definition of a handyman, and one you talk about some of the traits and characteristics, which I think are super important. But one of the ones you focus on is like learning new things, and I think that's
Mhm.
probably one of the key, maybe one of the most important ones,
Yeah. Yeah, like
because
top 3 for sure.
no matter what your background is, I mean, even for a person, I think, who has a background in construction, you'll still encounter things that you haven't seen before,
Yeah.
or different variations maybe that you haven't seen
Yeah.
before. And so I think that learning the not just the ability to learn, but the willingness to learn, and that it's not learning new things doesn't have some huge fear that's um, causes like a paralysis of
Yeah.
inaction by
Yeah, it's like,
saying,
what do you
well,
do
I
when
don't
you're
I don't
in
know
that
what to do,
spot?
so I'm not going to do anything type thing.
Yeah,
Um, I think that's one of the key things. I think because so much of it involves that.
yeah. Have you been in that position up to this point since you started your business, where you were on the fence and you were almost like wanting to maybe give up and walk away, not sure that you could or should do it, and then decided to go ahead and continue? Or have you been pretty comfortable with everything? I mean, other than needing to learn new things, but have you been in that spot where you were on the fence between paralysis and taking action?
Yeah, probably I was for a while, and I think in my case, so I would say probably the two biggest things that were question marks in my mind. So the first one, and this was probably the bigger one for me, is my age. So I'm 57, and I've been working my whole adult career as a software engineer. So I sit in the AC and I sit at a desk and I look at computer screens and type on keyboards and poke the mouse,
Yeah.
and to then say, okay, I'm in okay shape, but I think the part maybe that the aspect that was most uncertain in my mind is probably more from a stamina and endurance standpoint.
Yeah.
So my thinking was, yeah, I can do that. I can physically do the things I think that need to be done. I think I'm enough aware of my own limitations to not um, bite off something that I shouldn't bite off.
Yeah.
But the question was that kind of lingered in my mind for quite some time is, can I do this day after day after day after day?
Hmm.
And in my case, the what I don't know that I really concluded this because I think I kind of learned some of this afterwards as I got started was I'm going to start as a part-time endeavor on the side, and it's kind of like testing the waters, and I'll find out.
Yeah.
It'll either work out or it won't. And it worked out a lot better and smoother than I had anticipated it being, which was
Yeah.
kind of a pleasant surprise. Um, and
Why do you
just
think it was so smooth? Is it anything in particular you did, you think, or is it just is it where you live? There's just so much work that it wasn't hard to get in. Like, what do you think caused it to be smoother than you anticipated?
your channel, your YouTube
Well,
channel,
thank you
seriously,
for that. I appreciate that. Okay.
really. No, but
Was
I'm
there
one of those
anything
people.
else,
I'm one of those
like
people
actions
though.
that you took? Sorry.
I'm one of those people that. So I knew that this was going to be this is a radical departure, sort of, right? Going from a software engineer
Yeah,
who's sitting behind
definitely.
a keyboard all day to doing handyman work. That's physical work, a lot of exertion, doing things that my body's not accustomed to doing all the time. Um, but I knew that I needed to take it slow. So I think in my case, the fact that I'm 57 and my body had been so accustomed to just sitting at a keyboard all the time, I felt it was super important in my case that I needed to take it slow, to have a slow start, to let my body sort of gradually get acclimated to doing that kind of thing. And I think
Yeah,
that's worked out pretty well. I don't
that
know
was
that
a
I
good
fully
choice.
thought that through from the very beginning. I think it more just sort of evolved that way, but that was a good thing in my case. So the other big question mark that I had in my mind about am I really up to this is that I have never worked construction.
Mm.
I've never been part of a crew. I've never done home building or commercial building where I'm out on a construction site all
Yeah.
day, every day, and all that. And so part of it was that question of um, since I don't have that background, is it okay for me to still get into this even though I haven't done that sort of thing?
Yeah.
And I
Because you
think
don't
they,
know what you don't know, right?
yeah, and I think the answer is it all depends. It depends on the person, and I think it depends on how well you pace yourself, what's your comfort level, and what's a normal and natural pace for you to pick up on those new things.
Awesome. So, let's see. Okay, so towards the end of the question I was asking then, let's say I was one of your friends that you really cared about. We had a conversation and you felt like I was in the right mindset and I was doing it for the right reasons and that I was capable and you're going to encourage me to go ahead and pull the trigger. What advice would you give me stepping into this, knowing that I'm stepping into it brand new? I've never owned a business, never worked an actual construction job, just a handy guy, and I've decided to pull the trigger. What advice would you give me? Not in terms of like how to start an LLC or like all the little how-to things to officially get a business going, but in terms of once I have the business up and going and I get my first client and I just say, "Hey man, like what's your advice?" What would you tell me?
What I would say is leverage your strengths. So, kind of do an self assessment. It doesn't have to be anything formal. It could just be scribbling on a piece of paper, but basically, sort of make a list of things that you've done, or it could be a combination. It could be a list of things that you've done, and it could also be a list. It could also include things that you want to do or that you're eager to do or that you feel would be the most logical types of jobs given where you currently are in your progression.
Okay. Any other advice for the new guys?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think one of the other things that's super important is if you're whoever's part of your family and friends, I mean, basically whoever's part of your circle, your inner circle, that there's some support for you. And it which is not to say that every single person of your inner circle has to be fully on board, but hopefully that not every person of your inner circle is telling you that oh that's a terrible idea that you shouldn't do it kind of thing. So I think having some support from your inner circle, whether that be a spouse or kids or best friend or neighbor or
Yeah.
dad or whoever that might be, best
I
friend,
would
whoever it
really
is.
agree with that. I know my wife's support has been like insanely pivotal in me being able to do this. Like if she was not as patient as she was and if she hadn't believed in me the way she did, I really couldn't have pulled this off. And also a best friend of mine that's sort of been there from day one as a sounding board. So I definitely would agree with that piece of advice.
And there's a lot of little things that you might not think of that I think go a long way. And the little things can be just as simple as listening to you talk about how it's going, what you like, what you don't like, how's it go, you know, what you're learning,
Yeah.
failures you may have had, struggles you may have, and basically just listening and then providing some motivation. It could just be as simple as, hey, it's okay, you're doing good, keep at it, we're behind you.
Yeah.
Little things can go a long way just in you having the right attitude and feeling like, okay, I've got good people behind me who also want to see me succeed.
Yeah. That's awesome. Anything else to add for the advice?
I think the other thing is really probably more about just the logistics, because it for somebody who maybe hasn't worked construction, or even if you have and you're starting out, chances are that you don't have all the tools that you will end up needing. And one of the common bits of advice, which I think is very sound, is buy them as you need them for certain jobs. But there are some basic ones that you kind of also need right out of the gate. And then you'll find pretty quickly that certain jobs, if you get a new job coming your way and it's something that you haven't really worked on before, there may be a number of things that you have to buy because you're kind of picking up an area that you haven't like specifically worked on before.
Yeah.
Um, and that actually, I would, my thinking is that, so like you, my focus is property management. And what I can say is that I have quite a lot of tools, but I've also still bought a lot of tools.
Yeah.
And I've been working my business part-time, and I've basically been plowing all the money. I say all the money, it's not like it was a huge amount of money, but the profits that I earned, I've plowed back into building it
Yeah.
up to make it better, to have more tools, to have basically greater capabilities, to keep investing
Yeah.
in myself and my
You're
business.
reinvesting into the business.
And I think with a property man, like if working for property managers, because of the diversity, you there may be a need to buy more tools a little bit sooner, or maybe, than if you're working, like for example, if you're working for homeowners and you have a really specific niche, then you can maybe get by with having a smaller investment in tools, materials, supplies, and so on. Like if you're
Yeah.
very focused to say, here are the 5 things I do,
Yeah, like if you're a
then you
drywall and paint kind of guy, you're
exactly
just gonna need the drywall and paint tools.
right.
Yeah. But as a general handyman, especially for property managers, where they need somebody who can really take care of all their needs, you're gonna need the full range of tools.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. How does it I guess sort of both now and also in a couple weeks. So for everybody watching, I don't recall if you mentioned it right at the beginning here or not, but you've turned in your 2 week notice and you're
Yes.
about to go full time. Like you just turned in your notice just a few days ago. So you're literally just about to make that actual leap into being a full time handyman. So how
Yes.
does it feel? Number one, how does it feel to be a handyman? And feel free to answer that any way you want. That's not a leading question for any direction. How do you feel being a handyman? And also, how does it feel to be taking that leap and knowing that that's actually going to be your full time career soon?
Well, I'll address the second part of the question first. How does it feel for me to be taking that leap? So simultaneously, it's very exciting and very scary, all at the same time. Simultaneously, very exciting, but still kind of
Yeah,
scary.
and gut wrenching at the same time.
Yeah. But, when the scary aspect of it sort of enters my mind, I keep reminding myself, Paul, you didn't just rush into this and bite off more than you could chew without kind of thinking it through. You started small. You started with a very specific, slow pace, kind of
Yeah.
to test the waters and see that, hey, is this something that works for me? And the more I do it, the more I enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
And so by reminding myself of that, I'm like, yeah, I like doing it.
Yeah.
And the business aspect of it, in a way, it's kind of there are some parts of it that are a bit fearful, mostly because like not knowing what I don't know, and are there aspects of what I don't know that might hurt my business because I didn't know that I needed to do such and such, and I didn't do it just because it wasn't part of my thinking. You know,
Yeah.
those things are a little bit scary. Not terribly scary, but just a little concerning. But there's also a lot of liberation I feel in saying, okay, I will have a lot more control of my own destiny by me being full time in my own business. And there are things that will go well, and there are things that won't go well, and I'll have good days and bad days and all that. But still in all, I will have greater control over my own destiny than if I stayed in the corporate world, no matter who it was that I was working for. So, and the other part of your question, the first part was, how does it feel to be a handyman? Um, as bizarre as this sounds, and I fully realize this may sound very bizarre to some people. Most of the time, not 100%, most of the time, it feels pretty relaxing. Actually, the work is pretty relaxing to me.
That's good.
Not 100%,
Yeah.
but more than not.
But it puts you in a
Um,
good place mentally.
it does. It's relaxing, and I think probably one of the things that is a big advantage for me is that I'm doing things that are a lot more tangible than being a software engineer, especially like most of the software engineering stuff that I do, it's back end. So it's not the graphical part that users interact with, because those are a bit more tangible in the sense that you produce that, it looks nice. People say, oh wow, you produce that, that's really cool, da da da. But if you're
Yeah.
working on the back end stuff with kind of like infrastructure type things that no one really notices unless they're not working correctly,
Yeah.
a lot of the tasks, the work is interesting to me, but you don't really get a lot of satisfaction. I don't get a lot of satisfaction because in the sense that there's not a tangible thing there that I can point to and say I made that. It's
Yeah.
more like just checking off a piece of functionality or a feature on someone's project plan,
Yeah.
which is not, I mean, that has some level of satisfaction, but as compared to a handyman, for instance, like if if I do a fence repair project as an example, and the wind maybe knocked down a section of fence, or maybe the gate is all rotten and falling off, or whatever it might be, kind of a thing. A fence repair project is an example of a project for me that's rewarding in the sense that I take photos before I start doing anything of here's what it looks like before I do anything. And then I do whatever it is that I need to for that job. And then at the end, I take one or more photos to say, okay, here's the finished product. And it's probably more dramatic on like a fence or gate repair than it is like on a toilet repair or a
Yeah.
faucet repair, um, as far as the visual effect. But nonetheless, it's there's something very tangible there, and so there's a sense of satisfaction and pride in me being able to go back and look at it and say, okay, here's what it looked like before. I did the best that I can, based on my own limitations. I wanted to do a good job, and I feel like I did a good job, again, based
Yeah.
on my skills and what I have available.
That's awesome. What was your? Do you have any specific projects that were harder than usual, like more challenging, that you were more proud of? Like, for example, anything that you weren't sure you could pull off, or you were worried you just didn't have the skill to quite get it to the level it should be, and then you ended up pulling it off?
Yeah, so probably the job that caused me the most anxiety was my first drywall repair. And around here, all pretty much all of the drywall that I've seen, it's all knockdown texture. And so it's drywall, it's the patch and paint with knockdown texture. And I had never worked with drywall. I may have to like put up a few pieces or whatever, but I think I had done one thing. I take it back. I did do one small, very small patch and paint, probably about 20 years ago, but it's been so long that I don't remember what I did. And it
Yeah.
was like a little
Yeah.
patch kit from Home Depot type thing. But this was like much bigger holes, and it was, it's different this time because it's more for real, or at least
Yeah.
it felt to me like this is more for real. Like there's a higher expectation. If you do it for yourself, that's one thing. But if you're doing it for pay, the bar is higher there. And so
Yeah.
not ever having done it was really kind of caused a lot of anxiety about like how do I make that jump to go from never having done it to having done it at some reasonable level of success based on where I am.
And did you achieve that?
I did. Um, the I did three things, and I think they were all very helpful and necessary for me. The first thing I did was I watched a lot of YouTube videos. So was the kilted guy or that kilted guy
Yeah,
or
that
something.
kilted guy, he's awesome.
I watched some of his, and I watched some of Vancouver Carpenter,
Yeah, and they're my two favorites, those two guys, for
and
drywall repairs.
some others as well, and some of yours. So what I wanted to do was at least get enough exposure to where I feel like I know at least like what are the common elements that these guys are doing. Like
Mhm.
look for, are there patterns, like, you know 80% of the videos that I'm watching on this topic, they're all doing X. So, okay, well, doing X, whatever that might be, maybe that's an important thing, or it helps position you towards success. So, the other thing that I did was practice. So, I went to Home Depot and bought some two by fours, bought some drywall, and made myself a little mock piece of wall,
Yeah.
um, with little legs and the whole bit, and put up my drywall. And then I took think like a small crowbar or I think the small ones. I think the one I used in particular. I think it's called like a cat's paw or something like that
Mm.
because the shape of the hook looks kind of like a cat's paw. I think I took that, or maybe it was a small crowbar or whatever, and I just started like whacking, like it's like what maybe somebody might do like at a crazy party, or maybe it's like teenage kids that are wreck the place or whatever it might be, or playing roughhousing.
Mhm.
But I made some damaging holes, not nice holes, and I did a bunch of them
Yeah.
in the drywall, and um, then I started practicing just the repair itself. So I made however many holes that I made, and then I did the cutouts and to put in the repairs and with the backing board and the screws and everything else, and then started with joint compound and all that. But probably the part that I felt least confident with is the texture part, the
Yeah.
knock specifically the knockdown texture.
And you and
And
me
I
both.
tried
And the knockdown is one of the harder textures to match.
and I bought like two different cans from Home Depot, like two different brands or whatever. And I was like, I'm gonna try both, and I'm gonna like do different ones. And I thought I was gonna be more scientific about it than I actually ended up being. And part of the reason for that is because I'd heard both you and other people say that drywall has some parts of it, aspects of it that are kind of more, it's not like full science. There's kind of the art and just the feel, subjective feel of it.
Mm.
Um, and so I kind of wanted to just start playing around with just like doing it with, okay, based on what I'm hearing from other people, let me just give it my best and let's see what turns out.
Yeah.
And I was pretty surprised. I mean, there were certain parts of that board, that dummy wall, that looked horrible. I knew it would be, but there were certain parts of it too that looked pretty darn good, like way better than I was expecting it to look.
Yeah.
So that gave me a lot more confidence. The third thing that I did was I scheduled a consulting call with you to help me go through with the anxiety and like to more like the steps
Yeah.
and to go through, because I thought, okay, even though I watched these videos and even though I did this practice, like I need to have this like down solid. So
Mhm.
I had a consulting call with you. You may recall. We asked a lot
Oh,
of
yeah.
stupid questions,
No, you asked a
and
lot of really smart questions.
and I took a lot of notes and to help me like with my thought process, to think through like how do I go through the whole thing, and what do I do if this happens, kind of a thing. So that was probably sort of the scariest job of for me to make that initial jump, to make the leap and do it. And to
Yeah.
be honest, I still have some anxiety when I do drywall repairs, and specifically the part that I have the anxiety on still is the knockdown texture. And I
Yep.
just finished
You
a
and me
job.
both too.
I just finished a patch and paint job today, and I did the knockdown texture 2 days ago. I did the paint. I finished the painting today, but on the knockdown texture, I didn't get it right the first time.
Yeah.
And I looked at it and I was like, I blew it. So I was like, all right, I'm gonna scrape it off and do it again. So that's what I did. I
Sir.
just got my knife and scraped off all the texture that I'd sprayed on there, scraped it all off, and it's like, well, I'm gonna
Yep.
hit it again, but I'm
Yep,
gonna do
and
a little
that's
bit
fine.
different
You
this
know, you
time.
can be less than profitable on your first one. You can lose money on your first one, but get a little experience by the time you get it done right. And then your second one, maybe you make a little bit of money, but not much. And then by, your 12th one, you're finally in a position where you go, cool, this is a skill I have now.
Yep.
Does succeeding at that first big patch that was such a challenge that you practiced for, after you finally wrapped that up fully and closed it out, having had that experience behind you at that point, did that make it easier moving forward to tackle other new things because you saw that a thing that was hard, that it was in fact possible for a normal, intelligent, grown man to just go learn something new and do it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it
That's
did.
cool.
Because it's a confidence builder. And I think there's so much in kind of the handyman realm of work that the more you do, the more you're exposed to, the more things you try. And once you kind of get the ball rolling,
Mhm.
it gives you the confidence to take on other things that you wouldn't have had the confidence to take on from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And so I think that's kind of an important, for me anyway, I think that's kind of the right way to go about it, is to not take on the things that are super complicated, and get a good foundation and then build up gradually bit by bit. But I
Yeah.
think in doing that, yeah, the more you do and the more you try and the more you fail and the more you succeed, the more confident you are in taking on those new elements that you haven't touched before.
Yeah, that's awesome. One of my next questions was actually going to be, is it okay to fail? But I think you already have the answer to that. It's
Yeah,
not
it
only
is.
okay, it's almost inevitable if you're actually trying to do something bigger than the usual in life, then it's almost a given that you're gonna have to fail sometimes.
Yes. And but I think the answer to that question is it needs to be you, it's important to position yourself so that the failure is recoverable,
Mhm.
because there are some failures that are non-recoverable. So, falling off a roof might be non-recoverable.
Yeah,
Uh, or, if you get electrocuted, might not be a recoverable failure.
yeah. I have an
Or
important
something,
question for you. Go ahead.
or something even that kind of does your business in financially or legally.
Mhm.
So what I would say is it's okay to fail, but keep an eye on the scope of those failures, and allow yourself to fail, but it has to be manageable failures. The scope of the failure can't be catastrophic.
Yeah. Yeah,
Or,
you don't
or
want to fail at like putting a new roof on somebody's house.
exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Really important question. Is the tray on the top of a ladder where you put the paint, is that a step?
I think it depends who you ask.
Well, if you were asking the bulletproof handyman, is that a step?
So I I I spent some time thinking about that and thinking about gathering my own thoughts on that specific topic after watching some of those videos. And so I have a gorilla ladder that I keep in my truck at all times. And similar to how you said about yours, it's my favorite ladder. I absolutely love it. It's a platform ladder. I don't know the specific model, but the top step, I have 10-foot ceilings in my house, and if I stand on the top step, that's truly a step. It's a platform. So, the top step is
Yeah.
very generous in size and it's meant to stand on. I can stand on that top step and do maybe not every possible thing one might need to do on a 10-foot ceiling, but change out like bulbs or smoke detectors or air filter. I can do all those things with that ladder. So that's my go-to ladder. But I think the one I have probably I think the platform step is higher than the one on yours that you were using. But I am super risk averse for falls
Yeah.
myself.
As you should be. I'm still just a little younger and a little more stubborn and think things through just a little bit more than some. So let's change the topic for a minute. So I don't want you divulging like your own finances, but based on what you've seen of this industry so far, being somebody who's still just stepping into it in a way in terms of that you haven't even done it full time yet, but you've definitely
Mm.
started getting a feel for it. What would you say would be the income potential? Not what you're making, not what you plan on making, but just simply looking at the industry, specifically with property managers. What would you tell somebody if they asked you what the income potential was for a young man who just wanted to work really hard all the time? Somebody who didn't have, for example, a wife and kids and lots of other responsibilities who could just dive in. And you can answer that on a per hour basis or a day rate basis or just annual revenue. But how do you feel about what you've seen so far? What do you think the potential is for somebody who wanted to dive all the way in? Who lives near a big city, of course, where you can charge,
Yeah.
Austin is near you. I'm in Tucson, similar, not similar size cities exactly, but kind of similar rates in any of these normal, say, up to a million population, including surrounding areas.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think for somebody who has the drive, the motivation, the the grit, the dedication to say, I'm just going to do it and nothing's going to stop me. I'm just focused. And success is that's the only plan is success,
Yeah.
overall success. I think that like 200,000 a year, even just for one person.
Yeah.
So this is
It's a definite
just
possibility. It's
for one
within the realm
person.
of possibilities.
It's within the realm of possibilities.
Yeah. Awesome. What are your goals anyways? Not necessarily financially specifically, but you're quitting your full-time job to do this. What does success look like to you, say 3 years from now when you're settled into this and you've got a routine going? Where do you see yourself? Where do you hope you're at in terms of either revenue or work-life balance? What are you hoping to get to with this and to sort of maybe even out at?
So the first part is to provide for my family, but my wife and I are empty nesters, so I still have to provide for my family, but the responsibility isn't as great as what it was when my twins were still, young and living at home, and we're still their primary caregivers. Um, I think one of the things that's highly appealing to me is so the work life balance, but also just the freedom of setting your own schedule and not feeling guilty and not feeling worried. and not feeling anxious about just saying, hey, you know, whatever, like, 2 weeks from now, I'm going on a fishing trip and I'm going on a work day, or maybe I'll miss 2 days, and it's okay. That
Yeah.
you've built things up enough to where you can do that.
Yeah.
So I think having that flexibility is very appealing to me. And the other part of it, I would say, is for me, that's a goal, is some elements of creativity. And by creativity, I know like there's some things that we do that don't allow maybe a lot of space for creativity, but there are some areas I think that do. Maybe creativity in just like how I run or operate my business. Because I'm a software engineer, I plan to write probably some of the software that I will use in my business,
Nice.
because I can,
Yeah.
because I know how, and
Yeah.
I can tailor it exactly to the way I want it to be, and then longer term, not have to pay somebody else because I wrote my own
Yeah.
software that does what I
Well, and you'll have
specifically what
that
I need
tangible
to do.
product that you don't get
Yeah,
right now from your current job. You'll have
yes,
something you can really point to and say, "Look what I created."
correct.
That's really cool.
And I think the other part of it too, like, and this ties back to the bit that I mentioned about freedom, like with the schedule, is there's a lot of things that happen in my small town, or like in organizations that I belong to, or maybe in my church, where they say, hey, we're having such and such happening this coming Friday. And working for my view in working in the corporate world is it has to be something super important for me to personally to feel like it's okay to take the day off
Yeah.
to do like something that may be happening in the community. And that bugs me a little bit. So one of the things that I'm hoping is that as part of that, having that freedom at some point, is to something comes up, I have the freedom to go and like help somebody or participate in some activity or whatever it might be.
That's cool. So as long as you're making enough money, your focus is going to be more on that work-life balance.
Yeah, I think so in my case.
Awesome. That's cool. Here's a slightly different question. I got to meet your son a few weeks ago when you came through Tucson, and he seems like you've raised a really good young man. So
Thank you.
congratulations on that, and
We work hard.
congratulations to your wife on that. He was the
Correct.
kind of guy that I hope my kids hopefully can grow up into being somebody similar to him. So, and I know he has a sister too, right? A twin
Yes.
sister. So let's say far, far, far into the future, when you're not around anymore and they're on their own, if you were given the chance to come back and just spend a day with them, and you could give them one piece of advice on that day, that it was a guarantee, just absolute guarantee, this one piece of advice, that they would truly understand what you meant when you said it, and they would internalize it and follow it for the rest of their lives. What do you think that one piece of advice, or three pieces if you want three, but what would be the top, anyways, the top piece of advice that you would give them if there was a guarantee they would understand it, internalize it, and truly follow it?
So I think it would be a few points. I don't know that I could condense it down to just one.
Yeah, feel free to, if it's three or
And
four, however many you need.
and I think one would be to be humble, to be modest, um, to be kind, to be generous, and to try as crazy as this sounds, is to make the world in a very, very, very small way somewhat better because you passed through it. So it's not to say that, I would expect them to cure cancer or achieve world peace. I mean, but even, in very small ways, by their actions, by their example, by touching the lives of others, um, or through their offspring, that they make the world a tiny bit better place because they passed through it.
That's awesome. I love that answer.
Now, I think I would probably stop there.
Okay, cool. What does it mean to be a good man?
I think a lot of times people talk about what a person should do, and certainly there are things to be considered about what a person should do. But I think it's also super important to identify and recognize what a person should not do. Like to recognize that there are certain bounds that you shouldn't necessarily do things that you're capable of doing just because you can. And that's really about things that can have harmful impacts on other people, is kind of my frame of reference on that. It's more like having some restraint. Um, and some of this is more just like my personal philosophy.
Yeah,
So if I were a super wealthy person, I'm not, but if I were, I don't think I would have live in really extravagant house and drive really extravagant vehicles. Um, it's part of that restraint that of kind of what I mentioned, but that's a personal philosophy. I'm not saying, and I'm not necessarily saying that everyone should ascribe to that same personal philosophy, but that's just kind of my personal philosophy. Um, but I think it's important of, knowing your bounds, knowing your society bounds, knowing your society responsibilities, knowing your family and community bounds, your family and community responsibilities, recognizing when you are the right person to stand up and raise your hand and say, "Yeah, I'll do that." Something needs to be done, and no one's no one else is willing to do it, and maybe you feel a little tug internally that says, well, maybe I'm the right person to do that particular thing, to have the guts to say, yeah, I'll do it, and do it.
yeah,
And those could be like, it could even be really small things. But I think a lot of those small things can have a big cumulative effect.
yeah. Anything else to add to that?
I think without getting into politics, but just recognizing sort of the realities of what's happening within our society, like our country society, but even world society. There seems to be, and I don't know the reasons necessarily for this, but there seems to be a lot of tensions, and perhaps there are certain groups, and perhaps even like certain news groups that stoke tensions because it helps to give them something to report on.
Yeah,
But for whatever reasons, there's a lot of tension, I feel, increasing tension among individuals, groups, governments. Um, and I think it's important to diffuse those things when you can, or at the very least, not pour gasoline on the fire
Yeah.
to make it worse, or to help deflect or redirect whatever a situation might be, to help people sort of come down from this place of such high tension and um, anxiety and perhaps anger and whatever else it might be. And it could be like super simple things. I think there's so much truth and value in, when hearing people talk about enjoying the simpler things in life. I think there's so much truth to that. Just simple things like go to a park on a beautiful day, go to a park with family or a friend or a neighbor or whoever it might be, and just walk without a purpose, just to be out
Yeah.
and enjoy one another's company and to
Yeah.
enjoy the scenery and the beauty of your surroundings with no other purpose but just to
Yeah.
enjoy being with that person. And I think there's so many like little things like that that I think, if one single person does that, it may not have that big of an effect. But even if I think there could be a cumulative effect of doing those things. If one can do those things frequently enough to where they're almost a habit,
Yeah.
then that could be an inspiration to others around to, if nothing else, it maybe have them feel a little bit less stressed or a little bit less tense or a little bit less anxious about whatever might be happening in their circumstances or their surrounding.
Is that something that I ask because I agree with everything you just said, but I feel like I didn't. I feel like 5 years ago I would have heard those words and not really understood them. And I feel like it's only in, honestly, maybe the last year of my life that I've started figuring that out to some extent on my own. Probably not as well as you understand it. But is that something that's set in later in life with you, or am I just behind?
Good question.
Like, have you always
I would
understood the value of being
No,
in the moment and just
no.
experiencing your family and your surroundings? And just, I've always understood how lucky I am to exist on this earth, but I didn't always understand how important it is to just let, the business itself, which that's what this channel's all about, and that's what most of my life has been about. But I didn't understand until recently the value of putting all of that to the side for a bit and truly, because it sounds like what you're advocating for is just experiencing the moment and
Yeah,
letting things go, right?
yeah. And no, I wouldn't say I always knew that, or that's. I don't know that that's. In my case, I don't know that that's necessarily a product of my age. Parts of it could be. I think part of it is more just through, and this may sound like it's a proxy for the age, and it may be in some ways, but the evolution of circumstances. And here's what I mean by that. I grew up before the internet, and I'm glad I grew up as a kid without the internet, because I think that the internet would, and I'm not speaking for anybody else, I'm only speaking for myself. I think the internet would have ruined a big part of my childhood. But again, I'm only speaking for myself, because I think I might have been obsessed with, needing to do whatever on the internet, whether it was social media or playing some games or being entertained or whatever it might be. So I grew up without the internet, without cell phones, it's much simpler times. And as a kid, and you'll hear this, I think, from anybody in my age group or older, is that we were bored. There were times when we were bored, but then we would think, if we were hanging out with our friends, we would think of something to do, something fun, and then we would do it. So we might be bored for a little while, but then we would say somebody would come up with an idea. Let's get up a neighborhood baseball game, or let's play frisbee, or let's go ride bikes and get ice cream, or let's go ride bikes to this other friend's house, or whatever it might be,
Yeah.
right? And there were a lot of simple pleasures because we didn't have a lot of the things that people use today to occupy and entertain themselves. And when I think back on a lot of those, and I'm not going to say that everything from that time period was better than today. I mean, clearly there are things that are much better today than then. Uh,
Yeah.
for example, like medical technology and
Exactly.
things like that. But there were still a lot of there was a lot of, I think, there were benefits in having a simpler existence, and there was, I think, a lot of benefit in finding just really simple things, um, that don't require technology, that one could do to even like have fun.
Yeah.
We had a lot of fun as kids, even without the technology and the internet and all that stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, riding bikes and all that, and people can still ride bikes. I'm not trying to say that that's like completely gone,
Oh,
but
I completely understand. I was lucky enough too. I was right on the verge. The internet happened when I was in high school. Well, it happened before, but it was like, put it this way. I think it was the 6th or the 7th grade where our school had one computer that could connect to the internet. Only the librarian was allowed to touch it, and she had to type the things into the keyboard for you because it was so highly technical and new. And I can remember a summer where me and my best friend Randy, for an entire summer, we dug a hole, the biggest hole you've ever seen. It was probably 15 feet long and 10 feet wide and about 10 feet deep. And we accumulated pallets and boxes and furniture to put down in there. And, that was our summer. So I understand the value for sure of what you're saying. And we're going to get to experience some of that soon because you're coming to the camp out. And at the camp out, the area we're going to, there's no service. There's just no cell phone. You have to hike up to the top of a hill if you want to just barely be able to send and receive text messages and get a sketchy call. So, I'm going to bring my Starlink so everybody can sort of check in with their spouses and whatnot once or twice a day, but it's going to get turned on. We can check in, then it gets turned off, and we'll actually get to be in the moment for quite a bit for a few days.
sounds great. I can't wait.
Yeah, so before I take up too much more of your time then, as sort of parting words, well actually no, I'm sorry, one more question. Then I'll ask for parting words. And you don't have to provide any answer to this if you don't want. But because you have watched me quite a bit and we've talked quite a bit and you've met me, is there any advice that you have for me? Anything that you want to tell me that maybe I could work on, whether to make my life better or to be more successful or to be happier or to be a better father, better husband? Is there anything that you've seen in me where you thought to yourself, I hope Ray figures this out? I'm very
Uh,
sincere with that question too. The older I get, the more I realize that I didn't know anything before, and I always thought I knew everything before, and I kind of think I know everything now, even though now I'm figuring out even more so. that if I didn't know anything then, and I didn't know anything then, and I didn't know anything then, I probably still don't know anything. So, is there any advice you'd give me personally, just friend to friend?
Nothing that there's nothing specific that comes to mind. The things that I have, in watching your videos, every once in a while I will like mentally make some minor quibble with something you say, but it's extremely minor. So I'll give you an example. And this is not about like you as a person. This is more about like a minor nuanced detail about a handyman business,
Mm.
which is, and it relates to a question I just asked you in one of your videos of a quote and an estimate. But
Yeah,
like in my, and I don't know why, but in my mind, a quote, and I'm not saying I'm right, by the way. I'm just saying this is
yeah,
how I think, and based on whatever my experiences were. In my mind, a quote is something that when you give a, not you, Ray, but when a person gives a quote, or a business gives a quote to a customer or another business, that is the guarantee. The quote, the word quote in my mind implies this is not something that's going to change
yeah,
because the word quote is used. But when the word estimate is used, then there is wiggle room. But that's like such a minor, like
yeah,
nitpicking detail that like is not really that important in the grand scheme of things.
yeah.
Um, it's more like it comes up, I think, just based on like the software. Like if somebody's starting out a handyman business and there's whatever software they get started with, chances are whatever software they're using is going to use one of those two terms, and perhaps not the other.
Mm.
And just the fact that the software is using one term or another could bias or influence that person into doing things a certain way, and
Oh,
that
that's a
certain
good point.
way might not might go against the wishes of the person running their business. They
Yeah,
like they the software that they're using may call it an estimate, and they say, no, 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 this is a quote. Like
yeah,
I I don't want my customers to view this as something that might change. I want them to view it as something that is like set in stone.
yeah,
And so if that person has like the same sort of definitions as like me, they might want it to say quote and not estimate. And there
yeah,
might just as well be somebody who wants it the other way around. But the software could, sort of nudge somebody into a particular direction.
yeah, yeah. It
Um,
could literally almost set like a pre-expectation for how the course
yes,
of their business is going to go. Because if they view the word estimate as being a little, maybe it might change from here on out, and their software says estimate, then they may just start running their business in such a way that everything's a maybe pricing wise from here on out, as opposed to if their software says quote, maybe that puts them in a mindset suddenly of going, these are quotes, I need to be exact.
yes.
That's interesting. Cool. So finally then, are there any parting words, just keeping in mind that this is going to get published on the channel, and the channel is mostly, I think the bulk of it is people who are not full-time handymen, but who would like to be. So is there anything at all you'd like to say to them, or to just new full-time handymen who are still trying to figure out how to organize things and create a successful business. Are there any just final words that you'd like to put out there?
Yeah, there are. And I'm glad you asked that question. Um, don't sell yourself short. Don't underestimate your potential and your capabilities. And I'll relay that to my software engineering career. I once worked with a guy. He was my supervisor or my manager, and super funny. I mean, really funny guy. And in the software engineering world, as you probably know, like technology is constantly changing. There's always new software, like a new programming language, a new platform, a new this, a new that, whatever. So there's always something new, and a lot of times it's it can be quite a challenge to come up to speed on something that's like brand new that you haven't seen before, type thing. And I remember in some of those kinds of um, settings where somebody on the team would, like, basically they're exposing their self-doubt or their anxiety or their uneasiness with, oh, I don't know this new thing that we're having to work with, kind of a thing. And he had this saying that I thought was really kind of funny. And he always had a knack for saying things to kind of break the ice and kind of to get people start laughing and kind of put them at ease. And his saying in those situations was no one comes out of the womb knowing all this stuff, which is like which was kind of like a funny way of him saying, like, don't forget that everybody starts from the same spot of ignorance. And it's through hard work and perseverance and just keeping at it and believing in yourself and plowing through whatever it is, through whatever the learning and development process that might be for whatever it is that it's through that toil and experimentation and struggling and trying, and it it's that process going through it where you learn, and that's where you grow. And I think there are so many. I think one of the greatest things of all in YouTube is that it helps people. There are some content creators out there who have done some very amazing things with in all kinds of areas.
Hmm.
And many times they did it without having the proper or maybe the usual training or education or detour or non-traditional route to getting to their level of proficiency in whatever it might be. But
Yeah.
there are so many people who so beautifully showcase kind of the whole idea of don't sell yourself short, because there's so many testimonials out there among different creators, and you can see many times their evolution of, when they first get started on whatever it might be. Like it might be them playing music, it might be them singing, it might be them doing painting like as an artist, it might be poetry, it might be car repairs. I mean, as you know, the topics are endless, and all of those things and many, many others are all well represented. But I think that the greatest thing, not, I don't necessarily want to sound superlative to say that there's nothing greater than that, but a great thing about YouTube, I think, is the fact that it helps those people showcase what people are capable of doing, the good,
Yeah.
the productive, the creative, the ingenious, the inspiring, on and on and on. There's so many examples out there. And I think what I hope is that I hope that generally speaking, that many people find inspiration to maybe overcome their own self doubts or maybe their own feelings of self worth or feelings of inadequacy or just whatever trepidation or tension, apprehensions they may have about wanting to do something that's important to them, whatever it might be, like the follow your dreams or follow your bliss. That don't sell yourself short. And just because you're however many years old you are, don't let that be a barrier either. Because I mean, in some cases, due to like physical, health conditions, there can be situations where it is too late to pick up something. But I think in general, the general cases, that's not the situation, and that whatever people's dreams are, that they don't sell themselves short, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Follow their
Just like my
dream.
mom raising me told me a million times, and it probably had a big impact on me, is you can do whatever you want to do in life if you put your mind to it.
Yep.
And she said it in a way that I felt she meant it, and I internalized it and believed it. And then subsequently, I've failed at I don't know how many things. But I went into those things with confidence that if it was truly important enough and if I gave it enough, that I could. And in hindsight, I could have. That's awesome. Any other parting words?
I guess the other thought is so one of the aspects of the camp out slash convention that I'm really looking forward to is it'll be fun. It'll be a lot of fun for sure. But also, I'm really happy and excited to meet other people of this community, the community of your channel, just to hear other, where exactly people are and, you know, their thoughts about life, their thoughts about being a handyman or thoughts about whatever, like funny what are their funniest movies or um, best movies they've ever seen, or what are their
Yeah.
favorite, what music do they like. For me, music, listening to music is a big thing, huge thing for me.
Mhm.
And different music can put me in a different mood to help me
Oh, yeah.
relax or to get me pumped up. Or I grew up in the 70s, so 70s rock and all that was that's a big thing for me.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So
And you can use it to put yourself in the mood that you kind of
yes,
need to be in.
exactly.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. It's not very far off now. We just got a couple weeks and we're all going to be out there. I think we're going to have a lot of time to talk, a lot of sitting around the campfire until about 4 o'clock in the morning. At least I will be. I make that stupid mistake every time I go camping. I tell myself midnight or 1 a.m. at the latest. And then at about 4 o'clock, I'm going, oh, what have I done?
Yeah. So that's the beauty of a camp out, is that you're not on a schedule.
Well, awesome, man. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and do this. And there's literally no other member of this channel I would have wanted for the first interview that I do. I apologize that I'm not very good at doing these yet, but there's nobody I would have rather had for my first interview than you, because I watched you enter the arena and I've watched you work your way through it, and it's just been a pleasure all around.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for being such an inspiration that you have been and continue to be.
Well, you're welcome. Thank you, sir.